So, starting with mindfulness, it might seem, I think, so obvious as to not be worth mentioning, but most failures of memory are actually failures of attention.
Okay.
So to give a very simple example, on the Australian $1 coin, which way does the Queen's head face, to the left or to the right?
I believe it's to the right.
How confident are you?
Not very.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've asked audiences of over 1,000 people this question, and many, many audiences. In fact, I ask it in almost every talk I give.
Yeah.
And I pretty much always get a 50-50 split, which indicates, of course, that everyone is guessing.
Yeah.
Now, she does face to the right. But
I wouldn't know now because so much of, like, I don't really use cash. I haven't used cash regularly for about 5 years.
Uh-huh.
You know, like I've got like a jar on my desk over there, and it's got all sorts of coins in it, which I probably pick up only to go print things at the library.
Uh-huh.
Which goes to your point, like you have to be attentive to that thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, even if you haven't, and it's true, like none of us are using coins as often, as maybe we were, 10 years ago or whatever.
Yeah.
But still, this is an image that we have encountered hundreds, maybe thousands of times. And crucially, she doesn't just face to the right on the dollar coin, she faces to the right on all Australian coins, right? So all of us have seen this image innumerable times. But the point is just that we never really cared. So to paraphrase the inimitable Sherlock Holmes, all of us see, but very few of us observe. And it's the observing that makes all of the difference. Mm. So one of the first skills that we need to cultivate if we want to improve our memories is learning not just to pay attention, but also learning what it feels like to be paying attention so that we can become better at recognizing when we're not.
Yeah.
That's this kind of metacognitive ability that I was talking about earlier.
And this goes to the point of being extraceptive. Is that the word? Or exteroceptive?
Well, I think both.
Being aware of things outside of you. And why I was referencing health anxiety is because I reckon so many of us in this day, driven by things like social media, the use of smartphones, become very internal, so to speak, and less and less we notice, like not even noticing how this logo looks or the Queen's on the right side of a coin.
Yeah, so I think that's right, but notice that you have to cultivate good introspective abilities as well. That is to say that, like, in the case of anxiety, this is a kind of a sort of malfunction of the attentional system in a certain sense, in that you are essentially victim to the ruminations, right? It's like it's an inability to stop focusing on that particular thing. So, and certainly, from the perspective of being a memory athlete, the introspection is really a big part of what we have to cultivate, and certainly for kind of most practical learning as well. Introspection in the sense of paying attention at the very least to how well we're paying attention to other things, right? So even if we're cultivating awareness of the outside world, we still need to be cultivating awareness of our awareness of the outside world.
Yeah. And that's sort of what I was getting to, is just being aware of that fact.
Yeah.
How do you do that? Or how do you recommend people do that? Is it simply having the conversation with yourself and emphasizing it on a weekly basis through a diary, or how do you make that regular?
Yeah.
Outside of like, I just forgot about it and now I'm going to remember it.
So I think that there are a couple of things that can be really, really helpful. One is a particular meditative practice called Schemata.
Mm-hmm.
So
how do you spell that?
Shamata, something like that.
Okay.
So I recommend a book called The Attention Revolution by Alan Wallace. Now, Schemata is it's a meditative technique from the Buddhist tradition, but it is effectively, it predates the Buddhist tradition. It's effectively a secular technique and focuses predominantly on, so as opposed to sort of Vipassana meditation, which is where most of the mindfulness stuff that people encounter today comes from, that's a kind of a method for introspecting and reflecting on the nature of experience. So a kind of nice metaphor is to think of shamatha rather than, if you think of your mind as kind of like the sky, shamatha is less about looking up at the sky, and it's more about building a better telescope that you can then aim wherever you want.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the kind of traditional purpose. So it's normally done as a kind of supportive method to support more kind of inquiry-based meditation practices like Vipassana. That being said, the skills that one attains through shamatha, the skills of attentional control, can then be directed towards any object. It doesn't have to be other meditative practices, right?
Okay.
So that's kind of one of the main meditation practices that I have.
Yeah.
So that's and it's a really, really good place to start. And in particular, I think starting with the breath, but it could be any object of meditation. It doesn't matter. You could use a statue or a candle or a stick or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that starting to cultivate those attentional capacities that way is really, really good in a kind of formal sitting practice. But crucially, we need to be able to bridge the gap between the formal practice and then everyday life. And I think that this is a big challenge for lots of memory athletes too. There are lots of memory athletes out there who are really great at memorizing decks of cards or memorizing binary digits, but are unable then to take their skills out of that competition environment and start applying them in the real world. And so, what's really important, again, with the meditation, it's great to have a formal mindfulness practice, right? Whether that's yoga or, a sitting meditation or whatever, you need to be able to then take that out into the real world and use it when you're, and employ those attentional capacities that you've been honing when you're reading or studying or...
And that's the hardest part. I believe
it's all hard.
Yeah. But it's just hard to really translate it into actual practice.
Yeah, and I think because it's I think that the reason it's hard is because there aren't good resources, or there aren't that many resources with good ideas on how to do that, right? And again, this is one of the criticisms I have of the memory books that are out there, is that they have all of these very simple examples, and the reason that they all recycle the same examples because it means they don't have to come up with any new ones, and coming up with new ones would be hard. And so, if the resources were there, I don't think it would be all that hard, right? I can offer some very simple suggestions, for how we can go about bridging that gap, and we can talk about that. But basically, someone has to kind of develop these methods and put them into print.
And so we've spoken about attention. The other component you mentioned before was, so is the next layer down visualization?
Yeah.
And this is this idea of mnemonics, right?
Well, a mnemonic is anything that, basically anything that helps you remember something, right? So the word mnemonic comes from Mnemosyne, the Greek goddess of memory. And a mnemonic could be anything like the very sophisticated techniques that memory athletes use, but the term also applies to, the kind of acronyms you might have learned in high school or something like that.
Okay.
The visualization effectively just takes advantage of the fact that there are certain kinds of information that we all remember more or less effortlessly. So, for example, if you closed your eyes now, you could mentally navigate your own home, no worries. And you could probably do it in quite a high degree of detail as well. And probably as well for like homes you grew up in, maybe for homes of friends or family, places you've only been a couple of times. And what's really remarkable, there are kind of two things that are remarkable about this. The first is the volume of information, right, that you're able to recall in this way. Like, you can probably remember, like, where your, not just where your bookshelf is, but, if there are any kind of particular knickknacks on the bookshelf, or, what some of the things that might be on your desk or something like that. So the first thing that's remarkable is the volume. The second thing is the effortlessness with which you learnt this information. You never made any deliberate effort to learn any of this stuff. You didn't have to do any revision, any repetition. You just kind of know it. And so the kind of trick then, the sort of secret sauce of the art of memory, is to transform the kind of stuff with which we struggle, whether that's kind of names or faces or course notes or decks of cards in the case of competition, into the kind of thing that is effortlessly memorable in the same way that the location, the layout of your home is.
And a lot of that, it seems, based on the interviews you've done, the things that I've read over the years, is around the story. And this is sort of going back to the point we were chatting before we started even recording this, that people often practice things like mnemonics by habit, and that's why they're good at memory, but they don't even realize that they're doing so. So a lot of my memories are often based on a visual story. I always tie something to a situation or a story around that situation. And it seems like the techniques that you were using to train people on these shows or these talks was around making, let's say, the story around buying this cup of tea so outrageous and silly that you couldn't not forget it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is just taking advantage of what psychologists sometimes call among other things, what psychologists call the Van Restorff effect, which is just the observation that, we are more likely to remember things that stick out like a sore thumb. And so the more kind of funny, engaging, interesting, surprising we can make our mnemonic images and our mnemonic stories, the more memorable they're likely to be.